So let's just sit and relax, and pause. And I would normally begin a session with a prayer to my root teacher, so I hope you don't mind. You just imagine I'm speaking Swahili, but I feel appropriate, the blessing like my teacher traces his lineage back to the 8th century in India. So I'm trying to access some of that wisdom and blessing power. So one of the guy who wrote Emotional Intelligence, Daniel Goleman, was saying that one way to emotional intelligence is through prayer and through a connection to the divine, to connection. And people who did voluntary work as well in the community were especially high in emotional intelligence scores. So it's kind of interesting, this idea of connection. Pardon sawe lama rinpoche, dagi chiwo pede drinchola, kadrin jemper kanye jezunte, kusunta jina drupsao du so. So roughly translated, it's precious root teacher visualized sitting on a lotus above my head, care for me with great kindness and grant me accomplishments, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual, social. I've adapted the prayer. Pardon sawe lama rinpoche, dagi jiwo pede drencho la, kadrin jemper kernye jesante, ku sung tuji nadra saude so. So I'm going to try and explain something quite complex. Yeah, really. And so I think realistically, the thing that we're all sharing is that, say in the last month, do you feel that you've suffered something? Anyone feeling that they've suffered a bit or a lot? So it comes back to something so simple that we could forget. Like this equation, pain plus resistance equals suffering. Pain plus emotionally intelligent acceptance equals freedom from suffering. And I spoke about this habit of self-mummification, is we get trapped inside our thoughts. And so maybe it's even interesting to ask, what is an emotion? So the guy who wrote the 7 million bestseller said if you got all the university professors in a bar after a conference, none of them would really be able to pin down what an emotion is. So in Tibet they say, you have a thought and it's pigmented. I love that word, pigmented, pigmented by a certain feeling, and then eventually it becomes an emotion. So if I have a thought of, say, I'm just making this up, but if I think of an ex and I had a bad troubled relationship, then that is pigmented with like difficult emotions. So there's a link. In a split second of time you can have a thought, and then you pigment that thought with an emotional colour. And then what happens is that it's not our fault, but because of our ancient brains, we're just like the amoeba, the most simple form of life. If you put an amoeba on a petri dish and sugar at one side and hydrochloric acid at the other and nothing on the other two sides, the amoeba will head for the sugar, avoid the acid and ignore the other two sides. So on a very primitive level, we're all life forms like the amoeba. So we're always struggling to get the sweet taste or the sugar, and to avoid the unpleasant and ignore the rest as unjuicy. So pain is no different. The more we avoid pain, the more we suffer. So the ratio in the clinical trials is that 10 units of pain can cause 90 units of suffering. And there's a book by an incredible neuroscientist called Pain is Something Strange. I bet, have any of you come across this? Pain is Something Strange? So acute pain, like heat, when you touch a fire, like a gas ring, you remove your hand. That's very vivid. But chronic pain is something different. So you can put somebody through an MRI scan, and the physical pain might be a year old, but in their mind they're still suffering the pain, but it's not in their body anymore. It's gone. It's disappeared. And on flying back from Portugal, so the woman on the plane who had a frozen shoulder diagnosed, so she'd never picked up a baby, and then her 2-year-old baby she thought had accidentally swallowed one of her severe medicines, and in that moment she picked up the baby and took it and drove, which she hadn't driven for 2 years, to the hospital. So her memory of the pain was completely imaginary. It was in her mind, or in our heed, would you say, in Scotland, or something like that. So it's what it means is that it's an incredible irony, but we're trying to protect ourselves so much from pain that we create all of the suffering, like because we avoid just living life simply as it is, just giving ourselves the space. If you're sad, be sad. Don't fight it and become depressed. Like sadness, if you fight it, it can become depression. If you're happy, don't identify too closely with it, because it will pass. So the Tibetan word for joy, gawa, means that you're beyond happy and sad. You're joyful just to be alive and to be experiencing the whole range of emotions. At least I'm not dead. I'm sad, I can feel something. And every emotion has got its own texture. It's got its own selfness, its own isness. So we embrace the lot. So I like this phrase, emotional intelligence is learning to embrace all of your life, inside and outside, with the heart and the mind of a Buddha, so that you love everything. So it's simple. You're making everything much simpler. So instead of loving some things and hating others, like the amoeba, you love everything. And then you don't have the problem of the resistance, because resistance is futile. They say that. Culture reference. But the pain is inevitable, but the suffering is a choice. So the acceptance is the key word. So when I was working with the Mindfulness Association, we took 80 people through 4 weekend courses and a week-long retreat on Holy Isle. And I had the honour to interview all of them at the end, with others, at the end of the whole year. And the thing that they all said was, mostly what they said was the most benefit, was they'd learned to accept more. So just to accept is like a magic key that opens lots of doors. Like acceptance is the antidote to resistance. So we accept, but it's not passive acceptance, it's like active acceptance, proactive acceptance of, like that Christian prayer, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. So you accept the things on that level. So we are all tending to live in a world of our emotions, like self-absorption, like in that story of the garden on the island. So in classic Buddhism, they'd say there are two veils that separate us from being fully awakened in the present moment, fully alive, like awakened beings. So the gross level is like the harmful emotions like anger and jealousy and fear. And then the subtle veil is like we're thinkaholics, that we're always thinking our world, living in a simulation world, rather than embracing things as they are.
How does that work in terms of the bigger picture? So obviously you have to like accept the things that you can't control, but like when the world is how it is right now and it's so big and like the government has so much control, how do you get to a point of acceptance and stuff like that that's so evil?
I think in all the whole thing is that how do we accept things that are outside of our control, you're saying. So I think the most important thing is attitude. Remember this lovely phrase or saying of Viktor Frankl: in between stimulus and response there is a space to choose your attitude to what happens all around you. And in that choice of attitude, that is where your freedom lies. So the biggest challenge in our lives is to maintain a good attitude in a very broken world. But look how much benefit that can do. And this isn't to deny, but in the Buddha's time, some of you might, the warfare in India, say 2,000 years ago, people would lose limbs and there was no antibiotics. There was wholesale slaughter. And the Buddha, to me, was saying, the human condition, there'll always be things like that going until we evolve and we start to practice tolerance and kindness. And until that becomes a living reality, we've got to be the change that we want to see happen, like Gandhi said. Like Mahatma Gandhi said, we've got to be the change that we want to see happening. So in a way, when you're surrounded by darkness, be the light. That's kind of my message, that the more darkness that is around you, the more mud there is, the more that the thing that we must do is cultivate light. We must, and even though that's difficult, that is a wonderful thing at least to try to do. So I know of like a Tibetan Lama who was in a Chinese prisoner camp for 12 years, and he eventually was released and went to see the Dalai Lama. And in the conversation with the Dalai Lama asked him what was the most difficult thing, because he was tortured and solitary confinement for 12 years. And he was saying, several times I nearly lost my attitude of forgiveness, kindness in that situation. So I think that's like an inspiration that I think I must be the only person in this room who spent when I was 400 days in retreat, I didn't listen to one line of news. No books, no music. 400 days. And the inner joy is incredible, boundless. And so we have to protect our attitude. It's like a jewel that we've been given as long as we're alive. And to me, you could say it's like the union of the head and the heart, the union of wisdom and compassion. The union of wisdom and compassion. So I can remember being as a teenager incredibly depressed about the Cold War. And then Gorbachev came along, and overnight it seemed like it had all gone forever. And now it's back again, the shadows are back again. But if we can keep our inner attitude alive, that's our responsibility. So on the wisdom level, everything can change in an instant. Really, things are so much like this now. Things can change in an instant. On a wisdom level, but on a compassion level, is not to lose our heart. So I think on a practical thing is to help with gratitude. So the gratitude practice is like a you might come away from this day thinking, what is there practical apart from the 7 pages on the website or whatever, or that you could be sent. And one of them is keep gratitude as a practice. Energy follows focus. Neurons that fire together wire together. Every human being on the planet, it's not their fault, but they've got a cognitive bias towards remembering dangerous, harmful things. This is a hangover from evolution. We have a cognitive bias. So in these times where we have access to 24-hour news, when we're feeling lots of compassion, like for Ukraine and Palestine and Burma or wherever, that we must remember energy follows focus. If we focus on, it's like, remember those old scales you used to get in the vegetable markets? So you'd have these scales, and then they'd put the weights on the scales. So everybody could get very depressed or hopeless. And one of the emotionally intelligent mindsets is buoyancy and optimism. Buoyancy and optimism. So if you remember the things you're grateful for, then energy follows focus. Neurons, you will naturally become a more inner, joyful person. But if you focus on what's wrong with you or with the world, you'll just make it stronger and bigger and harder to deal with. And it's not our fault, but we've all got this genetic bias towards remembering the bad things, like from evolution, like it was better, to run away from danger, like saber-toothed tigers. But the thing is, the 21st century is incredibly difficult for human beings, being what we are with our genetic mix, or our evolutionary mix. We are, like the amount of virtual reality things. Like even, with all respect to Mark Zuckerberg, that the virtual reality headset, you could call that samsara in Buddhist terms. That it is nothing. Samsara, you could, the Buddhist term for suffering, samsara, you could call it like a state of emotional disembodied existence. So they're making thousands of millions selling something that gives you samsara, a state of disembodied virtual existence where your emotions are going up and down like a yo-yo. and it's insane. I think some yogi from 1,000 years ago, if they had a time machine, they would think this world is mad. Absolutely barking, with all respect to dogs. But, it's barking mad. That we've created toys, and we've become toys of the things that we've created. So this day is a reminder that we can reconnect with our human values, and don't let anybody outside break your heart. Keep your buoyancy, and your smile can change the world around you. And to see things in terms of your own life, not the abstract life of media, but your own inner life. Like your Holy Communion is like who the people you work with or your family, and to to remember gratitude, and gratitude is the antidote to greed. So one of the big emotional emotionally unintelligent things is greed. Gratitude helps you be satisfied with less. Enough is enough is a mantra. Knowing when to stop is a mantra. If you're worrying, knowing when to stop is a mantra. What is wrong with the world, like, the pharaohs the Romans wanted lots of silver in what is now Transylvania, and they took the silver, and that was like a genocide on the people who lived in Transylvania because they didn't want to let go of the silver. So it's not just now, but it's like our own personal evolution. Evolution is the key word. Say, even in 2 months' time, 2 months to change the neural pathways, 2 months to install a new habit. So if we worked at this, even just half an hour a day, in 2 months there could be a huge significant difference. So I'm not saying just be positive, it's deeper than that. It's be optimistic and train your mind to look at what is helpful and banish the demons of negativity. Is that okay? And so it's your attitude is the most important thing. That's where your freedom lies, your attitude. And the difference, if you want it in simple language, it's the difference from being on autopilot or being able to be fully alive. Or are you a reactive person or are you a responsive person? So autopilot is like we feel, oh, well, I had to get angry because that person kept me waiting in the restaurant. But it doesn't have to be this way. You can, if you've got the space in your mind, you can choose not to let your energy go with the reactivity pulse of anger, but think this is an opportunity in the garden of my mind to transform it into compassion for the waiter in the restaurant or whoever is around me. Acceptance is the antidote to anger. Sympathetic rejoicing is the antidote to jealousy. In Sanskrit, it's called mudita. So if you're seeing, the baby enjoying playing, you can sympathetically rejoice, and you go beyond the mummification of being caught up in your own storyline. So we have, as human beings, we have this magical ability to sympathetically rejoice in others' welfare. So that's the complete antidote to being jealous of, oh, I wish I was a baby now, rather than, whatevs, you see? So each of these emotional intelligence, each of the harmful emotions has an antidote. Greed has gratitude. If you're feeling poverty mentality, if you're feeling the trance of unworthiness, if you feel you're not good enough, if you feel you have an overactive inner critic, the antidote again is gratitude, like being grateful for all of the virtues and qualities you do have, or all of the blessings you do have. So it gives a sense of richness rather than poverty, gratitude again. And antidote for arrogance is humility. And the antidote for ignorance is wisdom. So just meditating allows you to think beyond your little self and you go into big mind, like the sense of, your mind is like the sky and everything is arising like weather patterns. And if you give yourself the space to experience everything without afterthoughts, everything is clean, every day is simple.